This is the second video for Chapter 20, and here we're going to talk a little bit about some more costs of fixed exchange rates and then also some costs of flexible exchange rates, right? Obviously, there's no one perfect solution. Otherwise, we would all agree what was the right option, and we would all have either fixed or flexible exchange rates. So if we think about fixed exchange rates, the problem becomes when interest rates are expected to be different, right? We know that if we have fixed exchange rates, then this has to be constant, which means that domestic interest rates have to be equal to foreign interest rates. And as soon as they aren't equal to each other, then we're going to have financial markets believe that there will be a devaluation coming, right? And so, or revaluation, depending on your perspective. And if they do believe that there's a devaluation coming, then that's going to force up domestic interest rates even more, right? And so this can lead to an exchange rate crisis, because now if you're the country where there's going to be a potential devaluation, everybody's trying to exchange your currency for the other currency, maybe the dollar, and you could potentially run out of your foreign exchange. And then you have no choice, right, but to devalue your currency. And so this is basically what happens, right, is that, we have a fixed exchange rate. Investors start to get worried. They start to demand higher interest rates. And either the government can give in and devalue, right, which is the cheapest option. But obviously, if you devalue your currency, that's going to make imports more expensive. That's going to be unpopular with your domestic voters. Or you can try to fight and maintain the parity, right? Fight and to keep the exchange rate where it is, but you'll have higher interest rates, which could lead to a potential recession, and you could potentially run out of foreign exchange. So it's not a good option. So if we look at the European monetary system crisis in 1992, this graph basically shows exchange rates, an index of exchange rates picked to the Deutschmark for Finland, Sweden, the UK, Italy, Spain, France, and Portugal. And you can see, right, they were all pretty steady going into, the middle to end of 1992. And then there was a lot of attacks, and that led to depreciations and devaluations in almost all the countries, right? With the only exception being France, and even France had a bit of a devaluation in July. And obviously, this was already part of moving towards the euro, right? So they were supposed to be within these specific bands. But the problem is, they had this long period of the European monetary system, and so we had different, price levels in the various countries. That meant that the real exchange rate was not equal to the nominal exchange rates, and many countries needed to devalue or depreciate compared to Germany. So, this was, only one example, right? There have been plenty of other examples, and that has led most countries to move to a flexible exchange rate. Although, of course, in Europe, they sort of went the opposite direction, right? And they have the most fixed of all fixed exchange rates, which is one currency, which we will talk about in the next video. So if we think about the exchange rate movements under flexible exchange rates, so this is the main argument for why we might not want flexible exchange rates, right? So if we take our interest parity condition, where we have 1 plus the domestic interest rate equals 1 plus the foreign interest rate, multiplied by the current exchange rate divided by the future expected exchange rate, and then we solve for the exchange rate. So this is we did this already in chapter 18 or 19, and so we have this ratio of 1 plus the domestic interest rate over 1 plus the foreign interest rate multiplied by the future expected exchange rate. And now this future expected exchange rate, we could solve, going forward, right? That's going to be 1 plus the domestic interest rate next year divided by 1 plus the expected foreign interest rate next year, etc., etc., etc. And so now you can see, if we plug all of that in just going forward, that the current exchange rate has to take into account not only, the current domestic interest rate and foreign interest rate, but all the future expected domestic interest rates and foreign interest rates. And so as soon as the market starts to believe that some of those are going to change, then the exchange rate is going to change. And so this is the big problem with flexible exchange rates, is that you get a lot of volatility in the exchange rate, meaning that it can go up and down a lot. And that, of course, is going to affect trade, right? Exchange rates are going to affect trade. And so, if you have an exchange rate that is very volatile, that's going to make international trade more difficult, because, there's an extra risk there for selling overseas or for importing, that has to be taken into account. So, for flexible exchange rates, which most exchange rates now are flexible, although certainly not all of them, they're going to move one for one with future expected exchange rates, and that includes, all of the sort of future expected interest rates in all countries. So if you operate under a flexible exchange rate, you have to sort of accept that. And we saw that, with the United States. We had a big appreciation in the first part of the 1980s, then a large depreciation. And, it's hasn't been anything but, fixed for the United States since the Bretton Woods fell apart.